Hi, everyone who is logged in as an attendee. Good evening and welcome to the Jackson Hole Historical Society and Museum's Beers and Banter program. So tonight we have the pleasure of hosting a dynamic duo, Vince Lee and Chris Lee. So a fun kind of father-son program tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Morgan Jowen. I'm the director of the Historical Society and Museum, and I'll be facilitating the conversation tonight, or trying to. And we'll also be looking to our audience members to also kind of help with questions and comments and keep this conversational. Personally, tonight's topic is somewhat near and dear to me. My background is in historic preservation, so I just love buildings and the stories behind them. And I do not mean to offend anyone on this call or any of our panelists by calling your work historic, but Vince and Chris have and continue to significantly contribute to the built environment of Jackson Hole. And so, I really do think we're in for a treat tonight to reminisce and learn about our community. Another interesting connection that I just have to talk about is I'm also excited for tonight's conversation because, as many of you know, our organization has embarked on a major building project. And so we're actually creating a new permanent home for the Historical Society and Museum on the historic Van Vleck block in downtown Jackson. So this is just one more learning opportunity for us to understand Jackson Hole's architectural context. So just a few quick housekeeping things before we dive in, and I'll really leave it to the panelists to introduce themselves. But to get us started, like I said, I'll facilitate the conversation. I have a number of questions to ask Vince and Chris so that we as a group can get to know them and hear about their experiences in Jackson Hole and their work as architects here. And then we'll really kind of open it up to the audience. Please feel free throughout the evening to throw your questions into the chat box, either to me or to everyone. And then also once we kind of get through those, if you're brave enough, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask your own question to Vince and Chris as well. We are recording the program tonight, and the Historical Society will make that available on our YouTube channel sometime over the next week or so. And then finally, if you enjoy what you hear and you see tonight, please consider supporting the Jackson Hole Historical Society and Museum by becoming a member or by making a donation so we can keep on putting programs on like this one tonight. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And I always start off our Beers and Banter programs with the question of, please introduce yourself and tell us when and why you first came to Jackson. And I think Vince will start with you and then head to Chris, which is always maybe a little difficult to answer when you were born here, but I'll let you explain.
Actually, it's quite easy, really, yeah.
But yeah, Vince, you want to tell us, when and why did you first come to Jackson and what made you stay here?
Yeah, Chris didn't have any choice of coming to Jackson Hole. He wasn't part of that decision. But anyway, my first trip to Jackson was 1964. I had been raised back east in the Hudson River Valley of downstate New York. And it sounds, right today, it's a pretty urban area. But as a kid, I just played in the woods all the time. And I've never quite given that up. I still play in the woods all the time. And I got interested in mountain climbing back there, and then ended up teaching climbing at the Outward Bound School and in the Marine Corps and so forth. So when I first went to Jackson Hole in 1964, I was looking for climbing. I didn't give a damn about architecture, although I had a degree. I wasn't thinking about architecture. And of course, the valley in those days just blew me away because there wasn't much there. The ski area hadn't been built yet. And I stopped by Jenny Lake and talked to Glenn Exum and the guys that had just come back from, Mount Everest. And of course, I was sold the minute I saw the place. I had to go back to 2 years of graduate school back east before I could actually come back and settle. I was married at the time to Danielle, my first wife, and we had two little kids at the time. Rick and Scott were twins. They're now 59. How old are they, Rick? Chris? Yikes. Yeah. And but they were little toddlers at the time, and we came back in 1967, and I worked a season for Paul Petzel in Lander, the second year of Knowles down in Lander before coming up to Jackson and getting settled. So anyway, I got settled in 1967, and my first job was with Kirsten's dad, Bob Corbett, who at the time was the only architect in town, and he was just there because the ski area was just then being built. The tower, when I first arrived, the towers were up, but they hadn't strung the cables yet. So it wasn't an operating resort yet, but everybody was anxious to see whether it would work and that maybe it would bring some winter business, because in those days, there was very little winter economy in Jackson Hole. I mean, the whole economy was the Yellowstone tourist season, generally 4th of July to Labor Day. And the rest of the year, there was a few of us that just ate elk and drank a lot of beer and waited for the snow to go. But there wasn't much going on in the wintertime in those days. But the ski area was just being built. And of course, that's what really changed things in Jackson Hole. The rest can be seen out your window anytime.
Great. Thanks, Vince.
Nice.
First one, when did you first come to Jackson? Yeah. Maybe focus on what is it that has kept you here for.
Yeah. So I was actually born in 1969, and yeah, early days of Jackson Hole. Mm-hmm. I guess it depends on when you got here, if that's early, but it certainly looked quite a bit different than it does now. We grew up at the end of Wenzel Lane in Wilson, and we were the only ones out there for the longest time. It was just a kind of a big field. So I remember that fondly as a kid. Of course, had a great childhood here. Although honestly, I couldn't wait to get out of this place because of the mosquitoes. Couldn't stand the mosquitoes. Fortunately, they took care of that problem. So yeah. So grew up here, went through all the school here. Fantastic place to go to school, and just great people. Met a lot of great people. Just a great community, as we all know. And it was it seems like back then there weren't a ton of people around, especially in Wilson. So we had a nice circle of friends, and it was just a great community. And it's kind of funny because you sort of take it for granted when you're in it and that's all you know. But I think it's a fairly uncommon thing, actually. And so it was reflecting back, it was a great time and a great place to be. And then I ended up spending a lot of hours in Dad's office when I was a kid. And so I think just through being in that environment, I sort of picked up some architecture. It was not the first thing I chose when I went to school. I tried some other things. I tried business and stuff, but boy, did I just find that was one thing. I just had a handle on that one without trying very hard. It was just kind of came naturally to me. So when I did architecture school up in Bozeman, Montana, then I just loved the Rockies and I love this whole area. So I never really imagined going much anywhere else. Tried Seattle for a little while, but really ended up in the Rockies. And then coming back to Jackson Hole was a natural. So I worked with Dad for a little bit, and it was a fantastic partnership for about a year or two. And then I think he retired and I took over. So and I've just been really enjoying it ever since.
Quick transition. Cool. Mm-hmm. Vince, can you talk a little bit more about your path to becoming an architect, and maybe talk about your thesis work, which was quite interesting? And Chris, I'll ask the same question of you if you want to talk more about your formal training.
Well, when I was a kid, I used to love to draw, and when I was graduating from high school, our guidance counselor, who was the mayor of our town and knew nothing about counseling, told me, "Well, Vince," he said, "you did pretty well in science and math and stuff. They need a lot of engineers, and engineers get paid well, so you should be an engineer." So like a dummy, I signed up for engineering. I went to Princeton for undergraduate school. And after one semester of nearly flunking out of the engineering school at Princeton, I decided I better change my major. And it turned out the first semester for architects was almost exactly the same as the first semester for engineers, except all the classes were easier. So I switched over to architecture, and of course I just loved it. And I went back to Princeton some years later for graduate school, which in those days you had to do. It was a 6-year program. So so I just love architecture. I love buildings. I still do, and I love to draw. But about the time that Chris came to work for me was when people weren't drawing anymore. They were using CAD programs. They were the whole profession was switching away from the old drawings on paper to computer drawn plans and stuff. And Chris was just so good at it, and I was so bad at it. I decided that was a perfect time to step aside and let him take over, which he has done wonderfully.
Great.
Yeah, and so I went to architecture school, but after trying everything else. So when I first went to college, I went to art school. I went to Laramie for a little while, because the same thing. I'd had art classes my whole life. Loved to draw. Loved to do creative things, but found the whole thing was kind of unstructured. It really wasn't. I wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to do with that degree when I got done. So, it was kind of a lot of fun without like a lot of challenge in a weird sort of way. So then I completely went the other direction, went into business school. And while that was kind of fascinating and I loved figuring out how things work and all that, I found that was a little bit cold and heartless. It didn't really have a great end plan for me either. Um, after several years of dinking around in college, I finally landed in architecture. Now, why it took me so long to figure that out, coming from my father, I have no idea. But boy, that was kind of, for me, that was the perfect blend of the two things. You could run your own business, you could make your own rules, you could do it your own way, and you get to be creative. And it had a product. You actually did something with it. It was kind of fun. So I found the blend of all the things that I really liked about life, found it in architecture. I mean, for a while, I even considered going into automotive design or yacht design or just product design or something. But unfortunately, you got to live in certain places for that. So architecture even gave you the freedom of being anywhere you want to be. Unfortunately, that's not exactly true. You got to be in a place where people hire architects, it turns out. But you got a lot more freedom, and you usually land in a pretty nice place because it turns out people hire architects in nice places. So that ended up being a pretty good thing. And then I came to work with Dad right as soon as I got out of school, and it was fantastic. And like I said, it was just an easy thing. I just took right to it. And it's strange because you don't know how much of your childhood, your early childhood, sitting in Dad's office while he's drawing pictures, how much that's going to affect you. But it's kind of funny. I guess that's why a lot of famous rock musicians have rock musician kids. It's movie stars have movie star kids. It's just one of those things. It's kind of the family business in a way.
That's awesome. And Chris, did you always think that you'd come back to Jackson, or?
On a level, I tried the city thing for a little while. I lived in Seattle, and I enjoyed that. There's some cool things about urban environments that I really like. In fact, I think I'm maybe a little more urban than Dad in a way. I love living in the town of Jackson, believe it or not out in the country. I like being downtown. I like being able to walk around and do that kind of stuff. And I find that too is a nice blend, right? I think it's neat to get kind of your downtown fix and go get your cup of coffee and walk around the town square while living in the middle of a beautifully wide open state and county. That to me is kind of the perfect. I love to visit the city, but I'd really rather live here. This is where you want to call home.
Yeah, it's nice that we have the neighborhoods and enough culture and amenities here, and then access to incredible wilderness and isolation and outdoor recreation.
Yeah, so I wish everybody could live this way. I know they can't, but it's a pretty good way to go.
Population growth is making it pretty hard, I think. But great. So I have a challenge for you guys. I'm looking at the question that I think I sent you before, and this might be hard, but you think you could summarize what Jackson Hole architecture was like when you arrived or when you first started practicing here? A few sentences, like what was Jackson Hole architecture like?
Jackson Hole architecture when I arrived was a bunch of house strutters and beat up old log buildings. there almost wasn't any architecture in Jackson when I first came. The Ward Hotel was, of course, probably the fanciest building in town, and where the drugstore and the movie theater was, that was a pretty substantial building. But there were only two paved streets in town when I first arrived, Broadway and Cash. And I'm not even sure the paving went all the way around the square, but it went around those two sides anyway. And it wasn't a real pretty town when I first showed up. And there was almost no need for an architect except for the Teton Village project, which was at that time just getting started. And that's how I ended up working for Bob Corbett. But I worked for him for about 8 months, and I got canned. A friend of mine back east called me up in the middle of the winter and said, if I bring a bunch of kids out to Jackson next summer, will you teach us how to climb mountains and then take us up the Grand Teton or some big mountain out there? I said, sure, hell yeah, I'd love to. And I went back to work and I told Bob, I said, Bob, you know, I got this offer to take these guys climbing next summer for about 2 weeks. So I'm going to have to take a couple of weeks off. It's probably not till July. And of course, I don't expect to get paid or anything. And he looked real serious. And he said, Vince, he says, you're going to have to decide whether you want to be a mountain climber or an architect. And I said, well, for those 2 weeks, I want to be a mountain climber. He said, I'll cut you a check. He canned me on the spot. So there I was, not even a year into my career in Jackson Hole, and the only architect for hundreds of miles in any direction had just fired me. But fortunately for me, John Morgan was also designing buildings at that time, and he was not a licensed architect, but he had just been designing, you know, modest homes and barns and stuff for his fellow longtime residents for a long time. And he had a draftsman named Bob Kurt, Inga Kurt's former husband. And Bob was from Denmark, and he was John's draftsman. And Kurt had just decided to cut out of Morgan's office and set up his own shop. So John Morgan was looking for a draftsman. So the very day I got fired from Bob Corbett's office, I went over to John Morgan's and he said, yeah, sure, come work for me. And I told him, I said, I got this climbing. He says, you can go climbing anytime you want, as far as I'm concerned. So I started out as a draftsman for John Morgan. Probably that was probably 1968 by that time. And before long, he took me in as a partner. And not too long thereafter, he retired and gave me the firm. So in about 3 or 4 years, I ended up going from a fired draftsman to the owner of Design Associates Architects, which is not the path that most people in architecture take. In fact, it was a good one for me because I really needed the time off from work to do the climbing thing, which became more involved as the years went by. And if I'd been in somebody else's office, I never could have done any of that. Of course, I would have had to show up for 8 hours a day and so forth. So that was really the birth of Design Associates. It was really an outgrowth of John Morgan's longtime practice. And it's to him that both Chris and I owe our careers there. He was our founder and a wonderful man, by the way, an absolutely wonderful man. And he and I were close friends until the day he died. In fact, I was living down here at the time, and I drove back up there to see him the night before he died. And so when Chris walked into a situation where he was his own boss of his own firm and everything, he was actually kind of lucky in Jacksonville, where there's a lot of architectural clients. The town I live in, the nearest architect is probably 50 miles from here, and he's probably going broke because in the real world, not very many people hire architects, at least not to design their houses and stuff. Yeah. So Chris stepped into a pretty good deal, and he's done well with it. I'm proud of him.
That's great. I heard a recent statistic from our colleague Kirsten Corbett, who is, for those on the line or listening, works at the Historical Society, and her father is the Corbett that Vince is referencing, but she had some low number of still many buildings. It's only a small percentage of buildings today that are actually architect designed.
Sure.
Right? So there's still a lot of stuff going on. And Vince, I don't know if you'll like this, but one of my favorite quotes from your book, for the folks on the phone, Vince recently put out a book that we'll share more information on at the end, but I loved your description of one thing I'm dead sure of: Jackson wasn't all that pretty in those days, with its billboards, unpaved streets, hodgepodge of mostly beat up old buildings, tourist traps, and ugly overhead power lines carelessly strung all over the place. But it was about what I'd expected, and I liked what I saw. I thought that was such a great description of when you first arrived here in Jackson Hole.
Yeah, it was real. It was real. There was nothing phony or fake about Jackson Hole in those days. In fact, the people that stayed there year round were all there because they wanted to be. Nobody was there by accident. The winter was too long. And So everybody there was a volunteer. You know, you didn't have people that were just there because it was a job. Everybody there was there because they loved Jackson Hole one way or the other.
Yep. Yeah, it reminds me of the powder clause, I think, that a lot of us are familiar with and respect if we can, right? If we all come here for many reasons to Jackson, and a lot of it is to climb, to ski, whatever it is. And so if you're not able to do it, it's time to find the outfit that lets you do it. So
that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, what about you? What was architecture like when you guys made this transition in the early 2000s? 2000?
It was, I think it was 2000, I think, or 2001.
Yeah, about the 2000 roughly.
We're right in there. So I got out of school in 96, I think, May of 96. Did a trip in Europe for several months and then came back and started working with Dad, and we had a great time. It was fun. We, went to lunch at Nora's every day. Those were fun days, great days. And then sometime around 2000, 2001, I think it was 2000, Dad comes in one day and says, I've got an announcement to make. My new office hours are between 11 and 11:30 on Tuesday. And then he left. I don't even think he came in on that next Tuesday. So we struck a deal, and he actually sold me the firm. It was the funniest thing. He had the whole thing cataloged out on the value of Design Associates. It was about 3 pages long, and at the bottom it was $219. And I'm not even actually sure I ever gave you a check for $219. I might owe you a check for $219.
I don't believe you did, partner. I don't. I never saw it if you did.
On that list was FM radio, which I thought was funny. I had to question that. I said, why am I paying for FM radio? He says, well, you have to pay for FM radio. I said, no, you don't. He said, there's a thing plugged into the back of the radio. That's what I'm paying for that. I said, who do you send the check to? Have you ever tried to unplug that thing and see if the radio still works? So it turns out it still worked without the thing plugged in. So anyways, so I took over the firm in about 2000 and worked on my own. Dad had always worked on his own. And I sort of, even when I came to work for him, we didn't collaborate on a lot of projects. I sort of did my projects. He did his projects. But of course I learned everything I knew from him and his style. And so that was great. It was great to get the office culture handed off. Dad has been a great cultural leader when it comes to all that. He really, the way he ran his life and everything was fantastic. So yeah. You're going to blush, but it's great. And so I continued to run it pretty much the way Dad had, and did everything on my own for a while. And then a few years back, I hired my first employee, and now we're up to about 10 because the firm has been growing. We've more jobs coming in all the time. But much like the way Dad mentioned John Morgan, we've held on to that. So I give my employees full autonomy. I mean, they can take all the time off they want. One of my guys even went to Spain for several months. He took a computer with him to go bike riding and stuff like that. And he worked from Spain remotely, and we didn't miss a beat. I mean, it was great. One of my employees is in Moldova right now. She's been there for several months. So it's been really fun and this is part of running your own firm. You got to do it the way you want to, and creating a culture of really great people doing really fun work, something we're all really proud of. Neat work that pays well and does all the right stuff, but still getting to live a great Jackson Hole life. So that's pretty much where I've taken Design Associates. As far as how the valley has changed, so all the power lines are gone around the town square, and they paved the whole thing now, and the town certainly has gotten buffed out, kind of like everywhere I think you can go these days. But certainly it's the same trajectory I think it was on during Dad's rise. It just never seems to stop. It just keeps going. So things are getting more and more precious all the time, and houses are getting a little bit nicer all the time. And every year, and for anybody who lives in Jackson Hole, we know this, every year we say the same thing. We're like, oh my God, the prices are like so high now. They've never been higher, and they just keep going up. So I think that's pretty interesting. And I guess it's just a testament to how special this place is. It's not like everywhere else.
Yeah, I think I've become more and more aware, and I am a newcomer somewhat to this area. Been here 10 years. That is it's like we're stuck in this loop of every year you say the same thing of wow.
But I think
prices keep going up, and we also say we just change is rapid here, and there's always been this feeling of nostalgia. Here in Jackson, we have stories in the Historical Society even back from the 20s of saying, oh man, this place has changed too much.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's always been relatively expensive too. I don't know, maybe Dad could speak to that one, but it seems like even back then, it was still expensive compared to, say, going to Pinedale or Du Bois or Idaho Falls or something. this was always a little bit more of a challenge to live here than elsewhere.
Yep, we're isolated. Sure, that's contributing.
But worth it in every way.
We all make that choice every day for the most part. Worth it.
Yeah.
What other changes or innovations did either or both of you experience throughout your careers? And I know, Chris, you're still in it and still probably keeping up with the times and trying to make changes, but can you point to like a few major things that you feel like have really changed the trajectory of architecture? I know Vince kind of mentioned CAD certainly, but if you want to talk about any of that more in detail.
I think, when I first started working with Dad, we were still drawing. I think the very first project I did, I actually drew with a pencil, and that was a wonderful thing, right? And I really enjoyed it. And Dad was a master at it. He is so good. Of course, it's just practice, right? You do something all the time, you get very, very good at it. And there's a certain passion that you lay down with the lead on the paper, and it's really great. The downside is when you start getting into all the changes, and do you remember, Dad, the old days of cutting drawings in half and having to put a new piece of paper in the middle and tape it all together? And remember the scotch tape, trying to get the scotch tape to lay down? Oh my God, what a nightmare. So that stuff, the tools have changed a lot. And I think that's maybe one of the biggest changes, not just in Jackson Hole for architecture, but everywhere. It's just the tools are different, which has meant the whole business has changed a little bit. Not necessarily the business, but the whole process, what you can do, what you can take on. It's sort of like, once you get a computer, your productivity increases, and now everybody expects that level of productivity all the time. If you still have and this actually still happens, there are still people that don't use computers, and their productivity is so low that it's hard to work with them. It's just, you can really see the change, and how our whole culture has changed that way. So I think back when I started working with Dad, and for most of his career, I think he would tell you that the number of jobs you could do, of course, was fairly limited on how much bandwidth you had as a person to do the work, before the term bandwidth was even a term, by the way. And you can only get so far and so deep into those projects. You can only put so much time into them because there's only so many hours between that you have available to get it done. The tools have changed quite a bit now. We're using computers to do most of the work. And so a lot of that very time-consuming work that Dad had to do is now automated away. And so you do more work, you do more projects, and you also can develop them on a different level because you have your whole back office is automated and doing all the work for you in a way. So that has been a real change, I think, in the business of architecture and how that works. As far as sort of the town and the county and what's been going on as far as buildings and so forth, I think Dad built some really nice homes when he was here. I mean, like I said, this has been going on for a while. There have been some nice homes built in Jackson Hole. Now it seems like everything is a nice home built in Jackson Hole. There are very few regular guy homes being built in Jackson Hole anymore. It's just the land values are too expensive. In fact, it's funny. I had a conversation with people today that bought a lot up north, and they want to build sort of a small house there. And we literally had to go see if that was even allowed in the CC&Rs of the subdivision. It's just there's sort of a big pressure here now. That's become sort of institutional. I think before there were a handful, and now it's like everybody. So.
Yeah, Vince, do you want to speak a little bit about, in your book, I feel like you do talk a lot about the socioeconomic changes and how you experienced that as a practicing architect here?
Well, not so much the economic changes. As Chris said, things have just gotten more and more expensive, by the minute almost for the whole time I was there, and it's still going on now, I guess. They weren't too expensive when I first got there. My first house, you have a picture of it there somewhere.
Yeah.
Cost $11 a square foot. That's where Chris grew up in that house.
We can't get tile for $11 a square foot now.
This little house too, as a matter of fact. I always liked it. But the thing the economic changes haven't made much of an impression on me. It's just gotten fancier and fancier and fancier and more expensive. I guess that's why I wrote that book you mentioned a moment ago, is that I realized quite belatedly, not very long ago, I realized that the whole time I was in Jackson Hole, there were really two two projects at work. One was the development of Jackson Hole, and the other was the preservation of Jackson Hole. And it took me a long time to realize that, of course, I was, as an architect, and I probably designed 400 projects while I was there and probably got 300 of them built, something like that. I was part of the development crowd, you know. I was one of those people that was developing Jackson Hole. And then in my spare time, I was one of the preservation crowd. I did a lot of conservation type work. I opposed a lot of mindless development, just development by people that were just using the valley as a way to make a bundle of money. And it didn't care about the consequences. And so the reason I wrote that book is it's a little bit of a confessional. There were two armies opposing each other the whole time I was there, and I was a soldier in both armies. I didn't realize it until recently. And in a sense, both armies won. Of course, you can see that the developers got their way. All you got to do is look out the window. But actually, if you look carefully out the window, the preservationists did a pretty good job too.
Yeah.
And that's why Jackson Hole is such a beautiful and pleasant place to live today, especially off season when the traffic isn't quite so bad and all that kind of stuff. So the fact that it's got more and more expensive is, I don't know, that didn't make much difference to me. But I can't help but think back to the Jackson Hole I knew back in the late 60s and early 70s. And I guess I would long for it if I was still there. It was a whole different place than it is now. And it happened slowly, you know. Everybody in those days used to talk about how, well, you know, the mountains and the beauty of the surrounding wilderness, that's the goose that's laying golden eggs for us. That's why all the tourists come, because it's such a beautiful place. And so the whole deal in those days was, we don't want to kill the goose that's laying those golden eggs, so we got to be careful. And yet somehow deep down inside, we all had this idea that there was a way to have our cake and eat it too. You know, somehow there was a way to do a little bit more development without endangering that goose. And if you compare Jackson Hole as it is today, as you see it when you look out the window today, to the way it was in 1967, it's changed a lot. It's like watching somebody grow old, you know. You see them every day and you don't really notice it. But boy, if you just see them, you know, 30 years apart, whoa, all of a sudden it's pretty clear what's happened. And so for me, the development of Jackson Hole, even though I participated heartily in it and took part in it quite enthusiastically and made some money doing it. I think not great money compared to what probably goes on today, but I did okay. But I'm a little bit ashamed of myself because I helped change it from the place I went there to live in to the place I left it back in roughly 2000. And that's why I wrote that book. It's a little bit of a confessional.
Right.
Guilty.
So that's funny. If I can jump in real quick, that I see it differently. Of course, you know, I'm a super optimist. I think this place turned out great. I mean, if you compare it to other places, it's a lot of time has passed since 1970. Everything's different. I bet Cortez, Colorado is quite a bit different than it was in 1970. You go to a place like Bozeman, Montana, where I went to school, you can't even find your way around that place anymore. They went a different direction. They just developed that place everywhere. So there is, if you lived in Bozeman in the 70s, you'd really be sad because it doesn't look anything like that. But I think Jackson looks very much like it did. I mean, there's a ton of open space thanks to the land trust. I mean, it really is pretty astounding that this place didn't get wrecked. I mean, of all the pressure, of all the money that wanted to come in and just make hay with this place, I'm impressed with how well it held off. Actually, I know the culture changed.
Yeah, you're right, and that's why I said
you can still go to Norris Fish Creek Inn and sit next to Charlie Sands in the morning, and you know what? That's a cool thing.
Both armies won. It's true. Both armies won in a way. But anyway, I can't help but remember back to the good old days. But that's because I'm old, and so that's what old. There were differences.
That is a good way though, Chris, of taking the temperature of, can you still find your way around this place? And I would think
Yeah.
you can, you know.
Yeah.
You know, those mountains look just the same as they did in 1970, Dad. Those haven't changed a bit.
Yeah, I know. I spent a lot of time on them, as you know, in them.
Yes, I do.
More about that.
And then I'm gonna ask a question from the audience. Thank you, Sherry Smith. Do you guys think Jackson or the larger Jackson Hole area has an architectural character or heritage? If so, how would you describe it?
Good question.
Do you think it has been maintained, or how can we maintain it moving forward?
Dad, I think you should take that one first, because I know exactly what you're going to say about the heritage of Jackson Hole architecture.
Well, you know, it's, I'm not sure I have a good answer to this one. It's changed a lot, of course. For one thing, there's architecture now, which there almost wasn't when I first arrived.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of very nice buildings and projects that have been done over the years. Some of them done by me and people in our office and stuff, but done by all the architects there, you know. But there's just a lot of it. and you know, it's just, I guess the difference is the old town was not very pretty, but real. Now, maybe the new town is prettier, but seems to me a little less real. Of course, I've been out of there for 20 years. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm not pointing fingers because, as I said a moment ago, I was part of the problem, not the solution. But back in the 60s and early 70s, boy, it was just you knew everybody. And they drove their cows down the highway and you got stuck behind them. Or if you knew well enough, you just nosed on through them. It was the tourists that would get stuck behind them and sit there waiting for some cowboy to open them up.
Yeah.
But you'd all laugh at that because you knew that nobody was going to open it up for you. You just had to nose your way through. So when I go up there now and I see everybody riding around in spandex on their bicycles with little pointed helmets and stuff, comparison. And as I say, I'm not finger pointing. I'm just saying, you know, that's the comparison I can't help but make.
Yeah.
So yes, you know, some of the early stuff in Jackson, you know, like around the town square, the old buildings, unfortunately, unfortunately, the heritage architecture in Jackson is kind of hard to find, honestly.
Yeah.
As you guys know, there were a lot of neat old buildings, but I think for all the reasons Dad mentioned I don't think this place was considered a going concern for a long time. I don't think they invested a ton of energy into their buildings. They didn't build them out of brick because, you know, you couldn't get bricks for one thing, but it seemed like most of the historic stuff in Jackson is gone. There's just not much of it left. Even when the Crabtree Corner burned down, it's cool. They rebuilt it the same way it was, but the original building's gone.
One of my early projects was the old Teton County Library.
Yeah.
It was a log cabin. And I did an addition, and it's on that list there. It's
still there, by the way.
Yeah. In 1969, I did an addition, and then I ended up doing 3 more additions. The final was in 1978. We kept adding these log wings on the old library. That was the house Chris grew up in, out at the end of Winslow Lane. That was the one that cost $11 a square foot.
That one's gone now, or I think it's the foundation of a bigger house, actually. Yeah, there's the library. That's still there, by the way.
Nice job. That was for Bill and Mary Ashley out on Skyline Ranch. That drawing that you just had up there. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Vince. You talk about how you designed what your clients wanted, and I'm curious, what did your clients want back in the 70s, 50 years ago? Was there a common thread of what people were asking you to design them, or?
Well, it was funny. Bill and Mary called me up one day and said, we're looking, we just bought a lot out there at Skyline Ranch, which had just at that time been subdivided, and the lots were available, and they had bought one. And they said, we're going to build a house out there in Skyline Ranch. Can you do it for us? I said, sure. So I went over to their place where they lived at the time. And it was an old log cabin right at the bottom of Snow King. It must be long gone now, but somewhere in that whole area where the hotel and all that stuff is now. I don't remember where it was, but I do remember that it was 4th of July weekend and there were snowbanks all around the house because it was on the north. You know, it faced due north. It never got any sun. It was in the shade of in the shadow of Snow King all the time. And so I walked in and I said, well, what are we going to do? We're going to build us a nice log cabin out there. And Bill said, hell no. He says, we've been living in this damn leaky old cabin all our lives. We want something nice. We want a lot of grass and a glass and open space and everything. So anyway, this was the house that I designed for them and they loved it. They were out there for a long, long time. Bill was there when he died, I believe, which is not too long ago.
That's great. And then I'm going to go back to the Wenzel Lane house because I actually, before the program, one of our attendees emailed me asking to ask about this house. And so I thought it would be fun if Vince, you both probably have something to say about this house.
Yeah, that was
Chris,
my bedroom right there on the corner.
Designing it. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about this structure.
Well, you know, I didn't have a contractor. I forget who helped build it. Bert Redmayne helped build it, I think. And the guy that went to Alaska, I don't know, a bunch of ski bums basically built it. And I took part in it. I drew it. And I was kind of a laborer on the job. But there were a bunch of guys that were, you know, skiers and climbers that knew something about construction. And so that's how we built it. But it was mostly concrete block. And we pushed dirt up around the sides to keep it warm in the winter. And it was pretty snug, actually. It was a cool little house. There was not a thing out there at the time, as you see. It was just a big hay meadow. Bessie Barney's place was just across the fence to the south. And we could hear her over there hollering all the time. She and Maurice used to be out there irrigating, and Bessie'd holler at Maurice all the time. And other than that, all you could hear out there was the Snake River. You were probably a half mile from the river. You could hear the river running all the time.
Yeah.
Because there was no traffic, you know, there were no cars. I mean, there were cars, but you know, not very many. And only thing wrong with that house was that there were a lot of flies. We never got rid of the flies. And boy, in the winter time when the sun would get on those south windows, here they'd come. I mean, lots of them. Not just a few, but a lot of them. But we made it, didn't we, Chris?
I remember as a kid, one of my favorite sounds in the morning. Remember, I already did the mosquito thing about when I was a little kid, though. Those things went after me. One of my favorite memories of Wenzel Lane is waking up in the morning at 5 a.m. to Sparky Imerson flying his crop duster all around our house, dumping that crazy chemical all over everything to nuke all the mosquitoes. We're probably going to pay for that someday, but man, I've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed the last 50 years of no mosquitoes. That's been pretty great.
Yeah, when I did that Ashley house out on Skyline, when we'd go out to the job site, Bill and Mary and I would sit in their car with the windows rolled up and talk about the job because we couldn't get out. There were so damn many mosquitoes. If you got out, you didn't last 5 minutes. You had to get back in the car. And
it's hard to understate what a drag that was, honestly. There were so many mosquitoes.
Yeah, They were bad. They were real bad.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that before, but it seems like, come up a few times now. It was serious.
Yeah.
Vince, do you want to talk about these other photos that I have from you?
Briefly, yeah. This is I did a lot of houses, as I said earlier, but I liked them all. Some of them better than others, but I tried my best. And this was one of my favorites because it gave me a chance to build the structure that I used for my master's thesis at Princeton in 1965, which was going to be a year-round outward bound school in the Appalachians of North Carolina. And that was the model I made of it. And it was all going to be done with, it was out in the boondocks and you couldn't hardly get there with big trucks and stuff. So it was all made out of small pieces of material that the kids could carry down the hill and then bolt together. That was the idea anyway. And so the whole building was made out of small pieces bolted together in the form of a big truss. And just as I finished the drawings, the outward bound people decided that they didn't need a a year-round school after all. So they canceled the project and it never got built. But then along came a couple, some years later, let's see when it was.
That was probably like 95, 96 is my guess, somewhere in there.
Yeah, something like that.
90s.
And I showed them that project and they said, hey, that's really cool. Let's do something like that. So we did. And so that house is still out there on Skyline Ranch, although it's on the river side of the ridge. So you don't hardly see it unless you have a reason to go actually down to the house. It's down the slope towards the Snake River bottom. But it's a fun place. You had the owner was a climber and he loved to climb up and down ladders and stuff. So there's a lot of that going on. And then we did a lot of log jobs. In those days, it was the out-of-town people that wanted the log houses. The local people all wanted something else because they were tired of log buildings. They'd grown up in them as kids, you know. But the out-of-town people that moved in all loved log houses and so forth. This was a nice one we did out there on Fall Creek Road, down Fall Creek Road.
Great house.
So a very nice couple that bought a big piece of property and didn't need a big house because there were no kids or anything. So it's a nice place, but it's not a huge monster like some of the ones that came along later.
Yeah.
This was a stone house I did over in the Teton Pines. I kind of fell in love with stone at one point. Early on, I fell in love with logs, and then I fell out of love with logs and into love with stone. And I decided I wanted to try a house with real stone arches and stuff. So I did this one out there in Teton Pines. It's still out there. It's a beautiful house. And it's gone through several ownerships. The inside is kind of laid out like an English manor house or something. We put in these big hammer beam trusses like you'd see in Great Britain and so forth. And I don't know how many ownerships it's gone through, but it's a pretty nice looking place even today.
Yeah.
And then let's see. And then, you know, there were, they just kept getting bigger and fancier. And I'm sure that's hasn't stopped.
Trend has not stopped. Yeah.
Solitude. And this was for the CEO of one of the country's major corporations at the time. And it's a beautiful place, all logs and stuff. But of course, it's not like the old log cabins. It's really, everything's absolutely modern inside. You know, it just looks like a log cabin, but in fact, it's pretty well tricked out inside with conveniences and stuff like that. And I did a bunch of those as well. I don't know what else to tell you.
That was it. I think that was the last one I had. Chris, I want to give you an opportunity, a few minutes, if you do want to share any photos of some of your favorite projects.
Here we go.
And then I'll ask, I'm getting some additional questions coming in.
This one. All right, you got it?
Yep.
So yeah, the trend has continued for sure. And like Dad said, you know, a lot of folks, when they come in from out of town, they sort of have a vision of what they're looking for in the Wild West. You know, maybe they've been watching Yellowstone on Netflix or something like that. But a lot of my clients, you know, they don't want the modern thing. They already have the modern thing. They got a modern thing in California or something like that. So this is, it's almost like going back home. You know, it's like they want, they're longing for something they sort of lost in their life somewhere. And there's some truth to that too. You know, a lot of people have come back to Wyoming or returned here, and it's like their childhood is coming back, you know, and I can't blame them for that, because as Dad told you, that's a great thing. So these are a handful of houses we've done that are basically themed on historic houses or historic buildings. Now, of course, modern interpretations of old buildings that never really existed in Jackson Hole, but this one's not too far off. In fact, we even had Cullum Mackay did the log work on this one. Dad, there's a name from the past. Yeah.
Good hand.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that, you know, folks wanting something rustic. Some people do want the modern stuff, and I think that's a cultural shift that's kind of happening now. This had a glass floor in it. That was kind of fun. So
we're still on our work page. I don't know if you're.
Oh, it didn't move, did it? Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on. Let me see. I always make that mistake. Let's see. Let's get this thing right. Let's do Chrome artwork. Let's just do desktop one. Okay. Got a green bar. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yep.
Are you looking at a living room in a house?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah. So this is kind of, we've done a bunch of houses kind of like this. So this is sort of a reinterpretation of the Old West, right? But new modern houses, well designed, well insulated, all that kind of stuff. We kind of this actually we do a lot of homes now with log siding on them because of the housefly thing. That's the log cabins are notorious for houseflies. This is one of my favorites in that space. This one is a log cabin, but it's not really a log cabin. It was done with log siding, and then we even made the corners look like log cabins so that it's a fully modern house, but it looks very sort of historic and rustic. So a lot of architecture is like this. It's folks coming into Jackson that want sort of that vintage Western look, kind of mountain architecture, and it's a lot of fun, and we really enjoyed it. But they're very modern houses in every other way, which is kind of nice. We do a lot of bunk rooms. People love bunk rooms. Loading slow, but there you go. So it's fun, and they're playhouses. I mean, people, these are not houses for people who get up and go to work every morning. These are lifestyle houses that you live in and enjoy. And we're
all your friends come to visit. Your extended family and your friends. Lots
of bedrooms. They're holiday homes. They're all that kind of stuff, and they all have all the fun stuff, fire pits and stuff. We do a lot of that kind of work. And they're big. This one, actually, it's funny, Dad, when you pulled up the Wenzel Lane house, this is a house I did that has a lot of Wenzel Lane DNA in it, if you think about it.
Yeah.
It's got some similar characteristics. Let's see, specifically, if you look at the tones and stuff. So some sort of modern takes on stuff. And then this is kind of one of my favorites, just for, this is one of the larger homes I've ever done at Shooting Star. But it's kind of, it's a little bit of everything, right? It's got a silo. This actually has a telescope in it. Very fun projects though. Really, actually very cool people, very fun people. I give people a little bit of credit when they come to Jackson Hole because they could have gone anywhere and they ended up here. And I think that's kind of neat. And I find that most of my clients are not here to change the culture of the place. It's not like Aspen and Vail where, the culture is just very urban. It's a lot of urban people living in the country, acting like country people. I still don't get that feeling with my clients. I think this town is still bigger than they are, and it changes them. You know what I mean? They come out here and they appreciate how nice it is. I'm sure it's a far cry from the way it was back in the 70s, but of all the ways it could have evolved, I think I'm pretty pleased with the direction it took. It certainly could have been much worse. So that's just a handful of projects on our website.
Great. Done quite a few. DAJH.com for people who want to check out more. There's another great, now after seeing both of your works, there's a great question from the audience. Can you guys name some architects that have inspired you throughout your career? Were there any historical, big figures that you look to for inspiration?
Well, when I was, in school at Princeton, the faculty there was all in love with the European modern movement, that came out of the 30s and so forth. It was very, I don't even know how to describe it, but anyway, I didn't like it. And I was, that was not me. I've never lived in a city in my life, and I'm not going to start now. Chris said earlier, that he was a little more maybe urban than I am. It wouldn't be hard to be a little more. And these guys were city boys, and they thought nature was something pretty to look at out the window, and I was much more inclined to the view of old Frank Lloyd Wright, who thought nature was the whole point, and that somehow you should live with and in nature rather than on top of it or outside of it. And so that's pretty much where I got started. Although the trouble with any famous architect like that is there's a tendency to end up trying to mimic their work, rather than develop your own way of designing. You get caught up in their way of designing, which even Wright used to say, don't do that. I do stuff the way I do it because that's the way I feel about it, but you got to use my principles to do what you think you should do. And it took me a while to figure that one out. And so most of the projects I did were rural projects. I did very few things in town. The library addition was an example, but there were very few. They were almost all out in the boondocks, out in the woods. Of course, they ended up being subdivisions, nice subdivisions, but they were all in the woods. There was no house right next door. The lots were big enough where your neighborhood was the natural surrounding. And I used to do my best to try to take advantage of that, to destroy it as little as possible and to introduce the beauty of it as much as possible into the structure through the placement of windows and all that kind of stuff. And towards the end of my practice, we were becoming more concerned with energy and so forth. And I used to try to take advantage of that too, solar, take advantage of passive solar energy, which was difficult in Jackson because everybody wanted to look at the Grand Teton, which is due north. So all your glass was on the wrong side of the house for energy purposes, and it was not an easy thing to do. So you'd use this high insulated glass, double or triple pane glass on the north side, but you'd also try to get some sun into the project from the rear, which is oftentimes where there wasn't much to look at, but that's where the sun was. And so that became a little bit of a challenge as we became more cognizant of the importance of energy consumption and so forth. But it was also a way to respond to nature. And so I used to think that was a good idea. You want to sit at a table and have a cup of coffee in the morning before breakfast, you want to sit in the sun. In Jackson Hole, where it's colder than hell, you don't want to sit in the shade, you want to sit in the sun. So gosh, I guess that means that the breakfast room should be on the east side of the house, And so I tried to pay attention to stuff like that as much as I could.
It's kind of funny, as an architect, you're really sort of a problem solver. I mean, really, people are hiring you to sort this thing out. You got to figure it out. And so you use all these tools, you employ all these tools from your experience. And it's funny how much of my experience came from Dad. I always put the kitchen on the east side, the breakfast room on the east side. It would be blasphemy to do it otherwise. I mean, it would be irresponsible to put it in another place. So it's funny how you create sort of a set of rules for yourself in laying out a building and figuring it out. And of course, you've got those great views up on the north side. So when you ask about inspiration, architects that inspired you and stuff, everybody inspires me, and everything I see. And it's funny. There's some famous architects that some of their buildings don't do anything for me, but then something they will do something for me, So it's not even specific to which architect, but the styles, the character, existing buildings, old buildings, neat things. It's kind of fun to figure out what makes a building neat versus a building not very neat. What's the difference? I mean, they're all made out of the same stuff, but some of them just feel better and work better. And it's kind of fun to try to dig into the essence of what that is. The other thing we do a lot of, and this also comes from Dad, is we listen to our clients, which is actually kind of unusual for architects, I think, in a lot of places, is that the client is an integral piece of what the building is. I mean, so when a client comes to you with a program of what they're looking for, we always ask them for pictures of stuff they like too. I mean, everybody has a different background. They're coming from a different place. They're looking for their home. They want to go home. And part of our job is to give them a brand new piece of architecture that's never been built before anywhere on a brand new lot that doesn't currently have a building on it, that is their home. So it's kind of fun to employ all those sort of things. And it is a form of organic, I guess, in a way, in that your nature is a big piece of that too, how it responds to the site. If you gave me a project to do on a flat site with no views, I wouldn't exactly know where to start. And so it's kind of fun to listen to the site. It gives you a lot of guidance in what's supposed to happen there. And if you listen to all those things and you listen to your client, and of course you have to deal with all the stuff from the planning department in town and all the other rules and regulations, you pull all that stuff together, you come up with a solution. And if it checks every box, you've nailed it. I mean, it is exactly what was supposed to be there from the first day. It's kind of a neat thing. And then on the energy conservation thing, I think we do a lot of that passively. I was a lead AP for a while. So I took all the courses to learn all about the LEED program. And it's neat, and it makes sense. It's important because buildings burn a lot of energy, it turns out. And in Jackson Hole, because it's cold, we go through a lot of energy here. But I think one of the nice benefits of being in this community, just because of the standards that everybody expects, is you can build really good buildings. And so we really insulate our buildings well, and we use really good windows, and we do a lot of things that in other places you just couldn't afford to do. I actually lived in Durango, Colorado for a little while, and we did some work on our house. And the things I wanted to do there, all the contractors were saying, nobody does that. You know, why would you spray foam your walls? I mean, you just put bad insulation on the wall, right? And ironically, their energy bills were so much higher than ours. So we actually live in a community with really low energy bills. So we don't really have to do those things. We do them because it makes for a better building, and we want to build really good buildings. So it's interesting. I've had a number of clients over the years talk about doing solar and things like that, but it almost never happens just because our energy costs are so low. You know, I encourage clients to try to future-proof the design, that when we when we do our part too, you know, there's a lot of stuff we do that our clients aren't directly involved in. We just do them because it's responsible planning for a building. But we try to make sure that they can be upgraded in the future, because the building's going to be there for a long time, and your energy costs can change.
Yeah.
You know, and so we do a lot of that kind of stuff. And but it's funny, I joke with my clients, if you really want to do the best thing you can do for the environment, we're going to super insulate your house and do all that stuff and future proof it, but don't put solar panels on your house. Buy solar panels and send them to your friends in Atlanta, Georgia, because they're getting their energy from a terrible coal-fired power plant. So you'll do more benefit for the world if you get those guys off of coal than fixing it here. And it turns out in Teton County, you can round up your energy bill to 7 cents a kilowatt hour and buy 100% green energy, which is pretty cool too. So.
Awesome. Chris, there's a question too about your flat pack home design. I know you're involved with some other things outside of Jackson Hole and addressing community issues like affordable housing. So maybe just a brief description of that flat pack home, and let's see, can you ever see something like that being used in Jackson to address our own housing needs here?
So the flat pack house is sort of a concept idea, and I'll tell you where that came from. I'm actually on the board of directors of a group called the Global Housing Foundation, and they're actually tied in with UN Habitat to provide workforce housing around the world, which is really kind of fantastic. One of my clients, her father was the founder of this foundation, and after we finished her house, several years after we finished her house, she called me up and asked me if I'd join the board. So I got on the board. And just as architects do, there was a problem that needed to be solved, and it's fun solving problems. I mean, as any architect will tell you, it's fun solving problems. It's just, that's what you do. You fix a puzzle, right? And so in the case of this, one of the problems was building housing projects all over the world. It's very cumbersome. Even as an architect, if I do a project in Salt Lake City, Utah, it's kind of hard for me to do a project in Salt Lake City, Utah. There's so much regionalism. There's a lot you need to know. A lot of on the ground work, then you're not there. You're physically not there. So it's much harder if you're going to build something in, you know, Pakistan or something. Much harder. So the concept we came up with was, what if we have a factory configured project that can be broken down into pieces, put in a shipping container, sent anywhere, and regular people can put it together. So that was kind of the idea. So it's like a super modular kind of thing. We actually had a call with an outfit today that is working on prefabricating these projects for us. That is the flat pack house, but it could be used a lot of different ways, because architecture right now is sort of mostly used in big commercial buildings and high-end homes. like Kirsten said, you know, most buildings don't have architecture, and so it's also fun to figure out how you can bring architecture to even the smallest projects, and do them thoughtfully and do them intelligently, and find a way to make them happen. So the flat pack thing is sort of a concept from IKEA. It's the whole idea that you can take it apart into pieces and put it together with, you know, one wrench. Would be great.
I don't know, IKEA is quite the skill set. I don't know if anyone can do that. Right.
Yeah, and you have to make it so simple that anybody can do it, because you don't actually even know what language they speak. So you can't actually have written instructions. You have to have diagrams. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Well, I know it's getting a little late, but there are two questions I want to kind of wrap up with. One is great that just came in, some folks tuning in from the East Coast. What piece of advice would you give to a high school student aspiring to study architecture?
I can jump into that one. I can say, do all the creative stuff. Everything else is easy. It's just tools, right? Learning how to manage the tools, but learn how to be creative. Right. And if you're a problem solving kind of person, if you like solving puzzles and crossword puzzles and whatever kind of puzzle it is, if you just enjoy the putting the pieces together, you're probably in the right place. You'll learn most of the stuff you do. Computers have really taken over the industry. So understand how computers work That's a big piece of it. It just because it's a amazing tool for making your creations come to life. And it's kind of funny. My daughter plays a lot of video games and stuff, and I've realized that is the future. Honestly, these kids, you can say it's a bad thing but they're so tuned into this device that basically is sort of threaded through just about everything we do. Yeah, she plays a lot of Minecraft, but it's creative, and it's really neat to see the worlds she creates in Minecraft. It's inspiring.
Let me add something for the high school person that asked that question. I would suggest if somebody's serious about getting into architecture, of course you got to go to school, learn what you need to learn. But once you get out looking for a job, try to find a small firm. If you go to work for one of these big city firms, you're going to be in the back room for the next 20 years before you get a chance to do a damn thing. I mean, you don't get into architecture to just design, motel rooms. You get into architecture because you want to create, you want to make spaces that are healthy and beautiful and comfortable for people to live in and to work in. And if you go work for a big firm, unless you're a genius and your boss happens to pick up on that, it's going to be a long time before you get to do anything like that.
You'll lose your passion.
Small firm. You won't get paid anything because they don't make any money in a small firm. But at least you'll get lots of different exposure to different parts of the field, and you'll have a chance to move up a little bit easier than you will if you're working for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. They're designing the Khalifa, Burj Khalifa in Dubai, but you're not going to be the designer of that project. You're going to be figuring out where the men's room is if you go to work for a big outfit like that. So look for a nice small firm with good people. You agree, Chris?
I agree. Come work for us.
Awesome. And then to wrap it up, I'll bring it back to Jackson Hole. And beyond your own work, what do you think are some of the most interesting, beautiful, inspiring buildings here in Jackson, either historic or contemporary?
I like a lot of the Steve Adenia stuff. I think he's got a very cool take on modernism in the West, out in the West. It doesn't feel like modernism. It feels like something different. I think I'm inspired by his stuff. And of course, the Carney Loganberg stuff is fantastic. Yeah, there's a lot of really great architects here. We're very fortunate as a community. We've got some great architects.
And what's your favorite historic building, Chris?
Oh, historic.
Like the modernist. What?
Yeah, the word's kind of cool. Completely out of place, but kind of cool. Yeah.
Right, yeah. One of the questions I didn't ask before, as someone had asked, and because I wasn't sure if you guys knew of, why was the wort built? What were the owners thinking?
What's the story there? Dad was probably here when that happened, actually.
What's the project? I missed.
Why does the word hotel look like it does?
Oh, I don't know. Well, it burned down once, and well, it didn't burn down, but it was gutted by fire years ago, and then they put it back the way it was, or probably put it back better than the way it was. But no, that was already here when I came. That was the fanciest building, I think, in town.
Love the Old Faithful Inn. Of course, everybody loves the Old Faithful Inn. That's amazing.
Yeah. Good underwood architecture. Any other buildings, Vince, that come to mind when you think of Jackson and what you loved seeing every day when you were here? Nora's, obviously.
Yeah. It's the most comfortable place on earth.
Yeah.
You asking me?
Yeah.
Some of
your favorite buildings beyond your own work here.
Yeah, it's been 20 years since I paid much attention. I come back now and I don't, there's so many new buildings and stuff. I don't know how to answer that. I'm sure if I gave it some thought, I could come up with an answer, but off the top of my head, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was it like to me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it is 8:10, so we'll kind of let people go, and just want to thank Chris and Vince for joining us tonight. This has been really lovely. Oh, nice. Leslie Matson, who's attending, just added in Hardiman Barnes. Right?
Oh yeah.
Interesting I think for people who live here, probably just.
It's because it's so obvious. It was too obvious. Too obvious. Nailed it. Yep.
But yeah, if they went away, you'd probably or yeah, you'd see it. But
All barns, though, honestly, all barns. You ever seen a bad barn? I've never seen a bad barn. They're always cool. Yeah.
That's what I do now. I've designed every barn in McElmo Canyon where I live. All my neighbors have me design their barns, and I don't even charge them for it. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
And my wife's got 4 horses, so I know all about horse barns, or I have had to learn all about horse barns. Let's put it that way. You know, you mentioned, Morgan, that you were in the process of building a new structure for the Historical Society. Years ago, I did a design for the Historical Society, and it was going to be over there where that motel is. At Max Cooter's Motel, the one with all the big trees.
Mhm.
Do I have that right? It's on the road out
Yep.
north
Yeah,
out of town.
it's still there.
I designed a really cool museum for that, and I forget what happened. They didn't have any money to build it with, I think.
Yeah, that was, there was a whole plan for that northern part of Cache where there's a parking lot now, and then the Cooter Motel, and then the
Yeah, that
Forest
was a
Service.
beautiful site with all those big trees and everything. Oh my God, I had it all figured out. Oh well.
I'll have to go back into the archive and find those.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you guys so much. I will just show this. This is Vince's book that I was referencing, The Last of the Old West, A Cautionary Tale. So if you're interested in hearing more from Vince and his time here in Jackson Hole, it really is just a beautiful account of the snapshot of Jackson of that time period you were here. And it really brings to life what the place looked like. You know, I can just imagine it, and the characters that filled those spaces. So I think this is available on your website, vincelee.com, for folks to search. And we put it into the chat too for people who want to look that up. But yeah, thank you everyone for attending. If you have follow-up questions, I'll pass them along to Chris and Vince, and I'm sure they'd be happy to chat further too. And then, like I said, we'll put the program up online too if you want to share this with anyone next week.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great evening.
Okay.
Yeah. See you, Chris.
See you, Dad. Love you.
Yep.